Welcome, David, and welcome everybody on YouTube. Um, so today, David, we're talking about the process data model.
Yes.
And before I ask you even about what a process data model is, I hear people talking about models a lot, and they're
hmm
talking about a data model and a process model and a data process model and an information model and a plant model. And so maybe before we even talk about any model in particular, when we say a model in manufacturing and in manufacturing operations management, what do we mean by a model? And then we can start talking about the different models that are out there and what we use them for and why we talk about them in the way that we do.
Yeah. So when we start talking about master data management, we get into the models and we want to model our data. And the concept is that we want to be able to present our data as not the individual values or individual parameters or properties or attributes, of it. We want to look at it holistically, and what sometimes is called a semantic model. That when I see it, I know exactly what it is that I'm looking at. The reason why it's so important for us, especially as we start getting into more of the artificial intelligence and machine learning, or AI/ML as it's mostly known, is what we're realizing is that we have to have common models regardless of whatever it is that we're trying to represent. So when we got into the call, you were saying, oh, there's a process model, there's a data model, process data models, and on and on and on. We tend to break it down in terms of what are the models that are going to help within the domain of this manufacturing operations management. And that's what we're going to talk about. Is last time I've done other videos where we were talking about equipment models of, sometimes if you think, the tool that we used on that one was ignition, we can create a UDT that creates a model of our equipment. How do we manage that? But that's really just a hierarchical look at how do we have our physical equipment laid out. Today, we're going to take a look at what is a process model of, now if I don't want to just model my process, or even limited model my resources. So adding on to equipment, you have physical assets, personnel, and materials. I also need a model. How do I actually make the stuff in my process? And that's the type of model that we're going to build, and we're going to apply some master data model or master data management to it.
Okay. So it's our model at the might start at, this is a box where we don't have product at the end of it at the start, and we do have product at the end, and how we get there. And
Mm-hmm.
then we can open the box, and this is telling us this is how we went from having our materials, having our people, having everything ready, and we've got product that we can sell out.
Yeah.
Because that's what
Mm-hmm.
manufacturing's all about. Product we
Yeah,
can sell.
absolutely. Yeah, it's I'm going to bring in stuff. I'm going to add some energy, add some other materials to it. Then I'm going to have a finished good that comes out the back end.
Okay.
And there's all types of things that happen in the middle. There's this value add, but that's what we're going to look at. Is as I'm going through this proverbial black box, what are the things that I'm doing, and how do I model what's happening as they relate to all of my resources that are going to be part of supporting that manufacturing process itself.
Absolutely. Right. Well, let's go. Let's get into it. I'll ask the questions where I think
Okay.
questions need to be asked,
Absolutely.
especially
Yeah.
where I need
Anytime.
to ask the question.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's the idea is that if I haven't made something clear, because I know what I'm trying to say, but if it's not there, by all means, let's stop.
Sure.
Let's digest, process, because I think that's really where the learning takes place, is when I do that. So let me go ahead and see if I can't get my screen to share. I guess before I do that, what we're going to talk about is how do I build a process model. I'm going to have some master data management that's associated with it, and then I'm going to apply it to a manufacturing operations management product, just like last time. I'm going to use Sepasoft. The reason why I like them is because they reinforce our standards based. So they do use parts of the ISA 95 standard. It's manufacturing operations management, and of course, it is built on a modern technology stack. It is one of the MES products that is built upon Ignition as well, which does give us the flexibility of doing a lot of cool things.
I think it's worth saying, before you get into the how,
Mm-hmm.
why do we build a data model?
Yeah.
And I heard a great quote, and it's from Jeff Noonan that, if you don't build a if you don't build your data model, you get the data model you didn't build. that you will have a
Mhm.
process model, you will have a process data model, you just might know it. So
Mhm.
you need to do it deliberately so that you know what you have and that you can manage your
Yeah,
process.
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So before we get into the modeling of or the actual application of master data modeling, I think it would be in good form for us to just revisit of what is a process model, what are the things that we are modeling here. So we've already hinted at some of what we're looking at. So when you think about the ISA 95 model, it really breaks down into three components of these things, entities of four. So the first one's going to be these resources that we have, and I've already mentioned them. Resources are it's more the physical things that you need to enforce manufacturing. I need some material that I'm either going to bring in, I'm going to add on, but there's material. That's one of the resources. I need some equipment. Where am I doing something? And within the context of ISA 95, these are our work centers and our work units or storage units and storage zones, but that's equipment. Those are the physical, where things are going to take place. And of course, you need people. They're going to add in they're there to execute all of the operation. You need people that are associated with manufacturing. And then finally, you have physical assets. And I just want to spend a little bit of time on that. Within the framework of ISA 95, when we say physical asset, think about tooling, think about those items that are it's mobile equipment. It's if I'm making pizza dough, think it's the die that's making the dough itself. It's not the same asset as it's used in, say, if I'm in a computerized maintenance management system. But those are the four resources.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I was going to ask you to dig in a bit deeper because it took me a long time to understand, the difference between equipment and physical asset because but isn't my equipment, be it my bottling equipment, my bottling machine, isn't that a physical asset? Um,
Mhm. So
you
it's a
know,
physical asset in the lens of probably your accounting. So if I were to do
yeah,
a return on asset, in that case, it's going to be referred to as an asset. But within the framework of ISA 95, going back and really just breaking this down, ISA 95 was created so that we can integrate our enterprise systems with our control systems. That's really what we're doing.
yeah,
Equipment is role based versus a physical asset is it's the tooling, it's the adapter, it's if I'm a pumping station, the pumping station is the role-based equipment because the role that I have is to move fluid from one location to another, but I might have a pump, but that pump is a physical asset because I may replace that pump after, say,
yeah,
500 hours. Or
yeah.
if I am a mixer, the mixer is the role based. I'm there to, as the name would suggest, mix different product together, but I might have a different attachment that I'm going to use for my mixer. And that's going to
Yeah.
be the physical asset itself.
The example
But
that I
yeah.
like to use and is that in a dispensing station, you have a dispensing station 1, 2, 3, 4, 5,
Mhm.
and there's different scales that may be used, different assets, and scales A might be in station 1 today and station 5 tomorrow, but
Mhm.
it's still the asset. So when we want to know how many measuring jobs, or we want to look at a tolerance that's moving, it's the asset that we care about. It's the actual physical scales. But when we're scheduling an order, that's the role-based equipment.
Mhm.
That's where that comes in. And if you don't differentiate between the two of them and you try and build one model that does both jobs, it becomes hard. Yeah,
Yeah, I think another way to look at the same concept is that if I were to replace the thing, would I still give it the same name? So if I replaced line one, would it still be
yeah,
line one? In that case, it's probably a role based equipment. But if I have, say, an impact wrench and I replace it, it may just follow the name of the serial number itself. So that's another way of looking at it is by replace it, do I call it something different? And that's another way of thinking about the equipment and physical asset. Almost seems like we could do an entire series on just ISA 95 and stuff. So
yeah,
um, yeah, so those are your four resource models. There are four domains that the standard is concerned with. Of course, production is one of them, and then we have maintenance. So anytime we do maintenance activities, that's one of those. It's a domain that's there. Inventory movements, so that's the third, and then finally quality. Any type of quality work that you do, those are the four domains themselves. And then the last one we're going to look at are the areas of information exchange. And we've talked about this before, and I always refer to the process segment. It's the basic building block. It's the common understanding of how we do something. It's the view that your enterprise resource planning system has, your level 4 systems have, of how do we do something at a basic level.
Okay.
And
Yeah, give me an
I guess,
example.
yeah,
Bring it home.
so an example of that could be with what we're going to talk about here is that I need to pack some juice in some bottles. So I have a packing line, and my process segment is pack juice. That's the common understanding of how we want to do something. There's nothing specific about it other than it's generic. It's a template. It gets used to be built. Or bake a cake or make a cake. That's another process segment that ERP says I need to make 96 chocolate cakes. Go forth and do that process. It's I guess I got ahead of myself. A process segment is just go make cakes.
Okay. Yeah.
Where the process segment evolves, and the example that I use is the Pokemon, is now if I want to get specific, that's where I'm now going to define, just don't make me a cake, make me a chocolate cake on line 3 using my, some type of mixer blade in the process, and I need 2 mixing operators. That's the people that I need. So that would capture, what's the equipment? It's specific equipment, specific people, specific physical assets using specific materials. So now we've gone from generic to something that's very specific. But it's all definition. We're just defining what is it that we're making, what are the resources that are needed associated with that. When you get into operations definition, I don't have it represented here, but sometimes there's something, or there's another element to this. It's called the operations bill of material or the operations BOM, and that's actually giving you the list of all the materials that are going to be associated with that. So it's something that is very specific. So definition is one of those areas of exchange. What I don't have represented here is capability. So that's now I've defined what I want to do. There is a capability model that tells me during a certain period of time, what am I capable of doing? Do I have the resources? Do I have the ability to execute some of these operations? Whether it's tomorrow or it's a month from now, the capability model exists in here just to tell me, am I able to do something? Do I have what's required in order for me to fulfill the manufacturing of something, which is really that question you want to ask before I start actually scheduling something. So definition, one of the areas of exchange. Capability doesn't get used very much. And then I'm going to get into my scheduling of now I actually not only want to make 96 of my chocolate cakes, I want to do it tomorrow. And this is where I get into the schedule model or the request. And that evolves that process segment again into this segment requirement that is part of some operations requests that is part of an overall operations schedule. And you will have all of these resources that are associated with that segment itself. So now I want to schedule it. So I've defined it generically, I've defined it specifically, and now I'm going to schedule it and I'm going to make something. And then finally, I'm going to see how did I do? So I planned on doing something. What was actually used? What line did I actually do it on? What materials did I actually use? Which operators were specific to it? And what physical assets? So I mentioned earlier having some kind of mixer attachment, which one did I actually use, and is there an asset ID that was associated with that? So just a real quick overview of these are the models that are associated with what it is that we're trying to do. Today's example is just going to be purely on definition. We're not doing any scheduling, we're not doing any execution, and we're not going to measure anything. This is purely just around the definition of what is it we're trying to do.
If I take perhaps a gross oversimplification and work it through, as writing my notes, I mean, the process segment, as we said, that's I want cake. I've now decided I want a cake and I don't know what it is. And then when I move to my operations definition, I'm opening my recipe book and I've decided I want the chocolate fudge cake. And that gives me my recipe, my operation bill of materials, and the definition of what I need to do. And it also gives me, this is to make one 12-inch cake or 20 cupcakes. That gives me. And then when it moves to schedule, well, I need the cake for the party at the weekend. And that will do a load of supply chain. I might have to go to the shops. I might have to do different things. And I was thinking about this, and then when we got to the performance, I was like, oh, right, yeah, we can't just eat the cake. But I mean, my grandmother would have, in her book, afterwards would have had notes on what went well, what didn't go well, when she changed perhaps the recipe a little bit and those bits, and would have built up her own book with notes, or especially if, if you look at people who have cookbooks where it's not someone else's, it's their recipes all bound together and folded together, and they do that. What went well, what didn't, and that saves me. But I think that for the visual learners who might be watching, that's a nice explanation of the difference between, because I have a process segment, an operation segment, and a segment requirement, and a segment response. And you say segment so many times, it can be hard to understand. But that idea of the process segment is the definition. I want cake. We don't know how many. We don't know what type. We're missing a lot of details, but it covers a lot of different definitions. And then we have to make it more granular, and we start getting out the recipe. And we start looking at our operations definition.
Absolutely. So it's make cake versus make a chocolate cake with chocolate
Yeah.
frosting on it. And then I need it for the party. So when am I going to do it? And then finally, here's what I meant to use. What did I actually use? And this is really what we're looking at here, is purely just it's the level 4 view. I don't want to get into the work, because that's all of a sudden what you were describing is in a recipe that's more of what's called a work master than the way that your grandmother might have gone about and enhanced it. That's where when she does it, she takes the recipe, which is the work master, but she's going to use what's known as a work directive of here's the implementation of when I did this. But we're really getting into the weeds there. There's plenty of articles and content that we've created around that. And I think that's just maybe something we need to do, is just talk about ISA 95 in a general.
Sure.
Let's get into a more detailed process of that. So
let's get back to our data model and our process segment.
So for the sake of what it is we're doing here, we're going to model all of our resources, and then we're also going to model the definitions themselves. So because I want to have a master data model for this, I don't want to have that live in any one particular system. I'm now going to abstract it into something that is a level 4 system that's available across the enterprise for any site or area or work center that wants to make whatever our brand of the product that we're going to produce is. I want that model of that common understanding of what are our resources, what are the properties that are associated with it, and how do we do it. I'm going to put that in some kind of database. And that's what I've created here. So if you're not familiar with DB Diagram, this is the tool that I have used to create these particular models. And I start with creating the resource models. So within ISA 95, I have the ability to create classes and just the items themselves. And you'll see this pattern repeat itself all the way down of I'm going to have an equipment class. I have equipment class properties. So these are within this class of equipment, whether it's the oven or the mixer, or I'm trying to think of some of the other examples that we used on making pizza dough. If I'm going to be considered a class of equipment, like I am a packaging machine, then there are certain properties that I want to have that are common across all that equipment class itself. So I have equipment class, I have I have that equipment class properties. Those will then get inherited by the actual instance of that equipment class, which is just called equipment. And then I have the ability to add on unique properties of that equipment itself. So there's the class, there are the properties of that class, there is the instance of that class or an implementation, and then finally there's properties there that extend. I've repeated this exact process for all 4 of our resource models. So not only have I done in equipment, I've built material class, there's material class properties, material properties. I have personnel class, properties. And then this is where we deviate a little bit. I have a person, and then I have person properties. Still follows the exact same structure. And then finally, I have the physical asset class, and then a physical asset class property, physical assets, and physical asset properties themselves. So within this grouping of things, if I'm an impeller blade, there might be material of construction. That's a physical asset class property. But within a physical asset, there may be something that is unique about it that, for me, I have my bend radius is something unique within that physical asset. So there's just some examples of what you have. So for this master data model, I have just in this application of the approach, there is a database, a schema that's been created, and then there are your 4 resources and their general how they evolve or how they are experienced or are represented, excuse me. So now once I have my resource models, I need to start going back from that drawing, and I need to create, okay, now what is my my process segment? What is my basic building block that I'm going to use? So I'm going to have a process segment. There's going to be some values about it, but all of those process segments, I now need to represent that resource model. All four of those resources are there. And you'll see that same pattern that exists that I'm now going to have for my process segment. There's an equipment segment with equipment segment properties. So now utilizing what was from above, now what does that look like? How do I represent, if I'm going to make a cake, what is the equipment and the properties of that equipment that I need to use? General rule of thumb when we're modeling these, the equipment segments that you're going to use or identify here are going to be classes. You want to make these as generic as possible. So if I want to package some product, I'm going to use packaging equipment in a generic
Yeah.
sense, and that's now a class, right? You'll see
Like
this
baking
exact
cake,
same.
it's in an oven.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And then I'll follow through of, okay, I have a material segment. I know I'm going to need some kind of flour. I'm going to need some kind of baking soda, some kind of oil. I'm going to need some kind of sweetener. That could be sugar, brown sugar, molasses, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm going to model that with process segments. Then I'm going to use those properties. And then I'm going to have a personnel segment with the personnel segment properties. And then finally, there's a physical asset segment and a physical asset properties. You've probably noticed, because this is a relationship diagram or an entity relationship diagram, there's all these lines flying around. Well, these are representing that if I have a personnel segment ID, I have to relate that back to my process segment ID. Then I also have to relate this over to some of the other personnel or some properties that are associated now with what I've said. If I have a personnel and I have personnel properties, I need to link those back. So you'll start to see that there's a lot of primary keys and foreign keys that are now starting to get pretty extensive in this entire process. And we've just created a process segment. Now we'll just continue on with our operations definition. So there'll be a, hang on, I think I missed something in here. There should be some process. I think I'm missing something here. I'll have to come back. I think they may be in the drawing. I just have them in the wrong location. So there's also something that's known as a process segment parameter. And that's going to be the value of something that is related to the production or related to this process, but I can't fit it in one of those four categories. Classic example of is, what is my theoretical rate of this bottling line? That's going to be a process segment that's associated with that. So you'll have that. There'll be some properties that are associated with it. So there's another entity that now shows up, but it's not specific to a resource. It's specific to the process itself. Generally, it's some sort of time-based measurement. Good rule of thumb for that. And then finally, extending on, I'm going to create the operations definition. So this is where I'm going to have something. I'm going to make something specific. I'm now going to create an instance of that process segment. It evolves, and you'll just see the same pattern exist. I'm going to have equipment specification properties, material spec properties, personnel spec properties, and then physical assets and the like. Here's where my process segment parameters landed. They should be up associated with that process segment itself. And it looks like what I did miss on this particular diagram, if something's not there, is that there's going to be that equivalent within that operations segment itself. So there's going to be some operation segments. There's going to be some parameters associated with that. So this is what it looks like. But if you back this entire drawing all the way out, you'll see that there's a lot that I need to create. So now we have a fairly extensive database with a lot of primary and foreign keys. And all I've done at this point is I've just defined at my level 4 view of what does the ERP say of just make me a cake. Well, when you were talking about your grandmother's recipe earlier, there's probably some little mini steps in there that you're going to have to follow in the recipe. If I need to blend my dry, blend my wet, blend my ingredients together. You're now going to start creating some how do you keep track of all of these primary and foreign keys? And this is a concept that we call when you get that object relational impedance mismatch. And this has been one of the challenges of implementing ISA 95 is just all the ways that you try to keep data back and forth. And you eventually just run out of the ability to keep track of where everything is, because now you're 10 queries in if you wanted to query a relational database. And this is where we get into the value of graph databases, which is probably a topic for another database. So, here's what we've done. Yeah. Say
because I
again.
love that. I'm going to come
Yeah.
back in a sec because I love that phrase, operational data impedance mismatch.
Hmm.
But I just wanted to do a small recap here at this view where we see each of these tables, and perhaps a pair of tables is better, but these are essentially, in fact, if you look at the top, each row is when you go back to your previous drawing, it's the square where you had
Hmm.
materials, and you're defining your materials for your process segment. And then you're
Hmm.
defining your equipment for the process segment. And then you're defining the personnel for the process segment. And then you're doing the physical assets. And then you move
Hmm.
on and you do the same for the operations segment, and you do the same for the operations, because while ISA 95 is a big document, there's a lot of repeating patterns.
Hmm.
And so understanding that pattern, that you know you've taken this and you've then gone and made those definitions for your process segment for each of your MEPP. And then you can move
Hmm.
on to the next bit. And I think I think it's just important to recap that, because
Hmm.
what you see in the next drawing is essentially a zoomed in version of this drawing.
Yeah. It is. I mean, this is what, if I were to take this and apply it to a relational database that I can now reuse it, this is an example of what it might look like. And
Yes,
is it perfect? Is it exhaustive? Does it have everything there? No, there's probably a lot that's missing. It's the balance of, I want people to have an understanding versus, if I make it too complex, then it's like, I have no idea what this guy's talking about. And I think we're already just bumping up against that line anyway, because we're kind of into the weeds here. But
yeah,
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 so it's this would be just that first implementation of this drawing of, this is, I'm just defining, I'm just saying the
sure,
what of there.
yeah,
I still haven't said, I haven't done capability, schedule, performance, and then we really haven't got into some of the minutia of what actually happens in manufacturing. But this is what it looks like. So, that's the first pass of, I've now created a master data model, and this is how every process or every piece of equipment, every plant is going to now start modeling that. If we are a cake factory, this is how we're going to use that data. It's not existing in any system. It's abstracted. It's a master data model that everybody can use. But we now need to start populating some of what does that look like. So we're now going to get to the actual database itself. That is how we've taken that model and we've implemented and we've built in some of the rows that are going to exist within that database itself. So you can see that the entity relationship diagram from the other one using DB diagram. I now
yes,
have, and I've populated all of those tables over here. You'll see that I do have the operations segments, and there's some parameter specifications. I also have a process segment parameter. So they are all there. I'm not sure what happened to it in that diagram itself. They might be hiding behind one of those other
yeah,
tables. But this is what it looks like, and I've also populated it with some data. So within all of those, I've actually created the inputs, or I've put data in all of these tables that we can actually use for building out the models that we're going to use. So this is that a typical role-based equipment that people are familiar with. We always start with the enterprise, and I've given it a level. And then we have Danville, that's my fictitious location. For those scoring at home, all of my locations or sites are cartoon cities. So I'll leave it to you to determine which cartoon is Danville from. It's a great kids show. My wife and I still watch it, think it's awesome. And then we get into, of course, the area. We have work units, work centers, we have storage units, storage zones, everything that you have that you would expect to see in this role-based equipment model you would have here. So we've now built out all of the areas, and and this is my fictitious juice factory. So we have the ability to make juice. There's 5 different colors, and we have the ability to pack up some juice, and there's some storage locations in it. So this is what that equipment model looks like, and I'm going to get rid of this view because it really dorks up my mouse
no
in the
problem.
process.
But I think an important thing is that this living as a model means that when we go to create a software system, whatever it is, we can ensure that the bottle capper 1 is always called bottle capper 1, and
Mhm.
nobody puts in a bottle capper 2 when it doesn't exist yet. That,
Mhm.
because often people end up with a model or a partial model in multiple systems, and then they struggle to understand why they can't extend functionality between systems, can't do different integrations. So but here, there can only be equipment put in a site in Danville. You can't call the site anything else if you're using this as your reference.
Sure. So something we talk a lot about is making this equipment ID unique for the entire enterprise. And the approach to do it is, make this ASW, this be ASW.Danville, and then make this ID, asset or ASW.Danville.finished goods, and et cetera, et cetera. Or you can use some 2 and 3 letter acronyms for creating all that, but you have a unique ID across. There's different approaches. It's your master data model. The point is that I'm going to have this modeled and managed in something that's external to a particular system or software or infrastructure. Yeah. So here's your equipment model. I've given a whole bunch of equipment model properties. So this now has these foreign keys. If I can relate this back to an equipment ID of what is it that I'm referring to. I don't know that the data itself is all that important. You'll see that a little bit later when I actually start instantiating this model. And then I've done the same thing for the process segments. And I've also done that for my operations operations segments themselves. So this gives you the difference between this is generic. I'm going to pack stuff. I'm going to clean in place. I'm going to fill in cap. I'm a packaging line, setup and changeover, and then I'm going to palletize. These are the operations that I'm going to perform, and they're all generic, and they all use equipment, material, physical assets, and personnel. But I'm just showing the difference between I'm going to have 5 process segments, 5 understood ways that we do something. But if I want to just do juices, so I have 5 juices, you see that I now have 25 of those instances for each of my process segment now is evolved into an operations definition for the specific product that I'm going to make. So, and then all of these tables will be populated in a very similar way. But again, just showing that we started with the model. Here's the database that we need to do, and then finally we're going to put in some data so we can actually start doing something meaningful with whatever it is that we're doing. So that's just the building blocks of what we need. Now let's actually put this in practice of if I were to take this approach and I'm going to apply it to an MES of choice, and I mentioned in this case we are going to use Sepasoft, what does that actually look like in practice as an example? But you can do the same thing with any MES product out there, whether it's Kanoa or Aviva or trying to think of some of that. I mean, just a myriad
GE Prophecy or
GE Prophecy. I feel like I'm missing a whole bunch.
There's no, there's Patex, there's Octet. I was listing them off earlier, so in my head.
But I now get it. This model here is going to inform what I do. So if I've done this correctly, you should be looking at an Ignition development environment, Ignition designer. Okay.
Absolutely.
So as I mentioned, I'm going to be using Sepasoft for this. When you're using master data models, sometimes you can script the creation of that model, which makes it very easy to do. Sometimes you have to do it manually. And in that case, if it's the latter, you use that master data model as your guide for how you're going to build it. So if you remember us, we spent a little bit of time looking at that role-based equipment hierarchy. I've now built that exact same model here in Sepasoft through their MES Equipment Manager. And I have ASW Enterprise, the Danville site. I have my packaging raw juice or packaging area. I have my 2 storage zones or storage areas, and then I also have some storage zones with the silos and the rack. So the silos is for storing the juice, and the rack is for storing the packaged juice. But that's what it looks like. So I've just had to build in that equipment model itself.
Yeah, and I mean, and especially if you can script it, I think people might be going, hang on, you've just created one model and now you've created the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
If you can script it and you have to create, if you have 10 systems, you will have to create the same model in 10 systems. Whereas with your data model and your master data model, you can, if you can script it, you can pull it, you can automatically do that, and you end up not having to do it 10 times.
Exactly. And we're actually going to do both here. It's just, I'm showing it's the reason why the approach is, well, it's a limitation. You can't create this model through scripting or, there's some caveats to what it is that you're doing. And it's much like saying ignition. I can't script the creation of a UDT, but I can script the instantiation of that UDT. So
Yeah.
there's some rules around what it is that you're doing. I have also created some users in here, so I didn't show that there are there's a personnel table and some persons, but we actually have 5 people there that we have a username that's associated, or a username, and then of course we have the name, they've been given a role, and there's a schedule associated with that. Because this is all based on ignition, and the way that Cepasoft and Kanoa does this as well is that users oftentimes are managed by the software itself. You can't create a user itself. Typically you're going to integrate with some other material, and that's where we get into like your Azure Active Directory or a local Active Directory or some kind of identity provider. But once you have the user there, then you have the ability to add in all of the properties. You can also create, here we have packaging operator. Those are going to be your personnel, your classes. So that's going to be your personnel class, and then we have the existence of the username itself. So we've created the persons in here well as the personnel. And now we're going to get into the fun part of it, because this is something that you can do through scripting within Cepasoft, is that one of the objects or one of the components that you have is this MES object editor. And there's different types of objects that you can look at, but one of them is your material. So this is something that I can script, and we'll bring up the script that I'm now going to run for creating all of my material. So this is an entire script that is going to read that master data file, and I'm actually going to populate all of that material itself. So we'll bring up the script console. We'll drop this in. I'm crossing my fingers that I don't have white space or is there anything that went wonky. I will go ahead and execute this. And you'll see that I'm now creating everything. Something that I'll point out here in this script itself is that there's this word here we call idempotent, and we sometimes call that idempotency, which is if I did the exact same thing again, would I get the same results? And I've created this script that if something already exists, it's going to skip it. It's going to ignore what it is that I have done, because here's a little inside baseball secret. This isn't the first time I've run this. I go through and test, and again, cross your fingers you don't have white space, that something happens. But I do test that, and there's just some things that it's easier just to implement. But it's a good practice anyway to follow that process of don't or allow yourself when you're doing data exchange to have this idempotency in there where you can do the same thing and you're going to get the same result. You're not going to have all kinds of errors. So now you can see that all my materials are now represented there. I have my blue juice, and something that I've also added in that process, I now not only have the juice itself, but I have examples of all the properties that are associated with it. So remember, go back to the table, I had all the resources were represented. In this case, it's a material, and then I have material properties. So you can see these are all the properties that are associated with that material. And this is when we start talking about, I have an asset model. This is everything that I know about this, say, particular equipment. But in this case, these are my property model or my material models, but I'll also have equipment models or equipment properties as well. I got too many terms flowing around here. But these are the properties that are going to be very common for if I'm looking at juice. So Brix is concentration of sugar. Then you have viscosity, storage temp, max. They're all the properties that you would need to know about it. So it's a good representation. All of that came from that master data model. So if I were to put this in Kanoa, if I were to put this in Aviva, in GE Prophecy, in Plant and Production Center, in, again, fill in your favorite blank, I'm going to have the exact same equipment. We're going to be talking about the same things. So there was an example of me doing some scripting of the process itself. I also have the ability to do equipment. So let me get into the equipment itself. Now you can see that I still have all of that material itself, all of the equipment is represented here, but I need to add in some properties. I need to know there's some information about this equipment that I need to know because I'm going to use that for the control of my process. So here, I'm going to add in all my equipment properties. So we're going to head back over to the handy dandy script. I'm going to drop that in, and we're going to execute. And now it's going to give me all of the reaction of everything happening. And it does take a little bit of doing. Looks like it should be good. We'll see what happens. I didn't see anything bad.
No.
Which is good. So now if I go to this case packer and this capper that we were just looking at, I now have all of my equipment properties are displayed here. So just like my materials, the way that I've described my materials, the way that I have material and material classes and all of those properties, I have the same thing here. And if I did this right, if I go in to edit my settings, you can see that there are a lot of properties, but I also have some of these that are like area functions and area supervisors. Those are inherited.
Yeah.
I wonder where those came from. Well, this is where we get into when I have classes and class properties, because this is part of an equipment class, I've inherited all of the properties that have been defined to that class of equipment. So this happens to be a capper. This is information about the capper that is important for me to know. And then I've extended that. I now have added my cap type and my cap speed, where you can see that this is going to be my instance of that equipment class, or just the capper itself. These are all the properties that are associated with that as well. So this is just demonstrating. And again, I'm going to maintain that master data model. It's not managed in a system, a solution, or infrastructure. It's abstracted. It's available for any choice out there. So if I have another location that decided they want to do something similar, but they want to use Canoa because they like the ignition-based MES offerings that are out there, not a problem. I'll just create a script that does the exact same thing. And of course, they refer to everything as within assets, but that's okay. We're talking the same thing. It all came from the same master data models. And then finally, this is probably one of the most complex aspects of how Cepasoft was built, that it does use process segments and operation definitions. Well, you can see here that I don't have anything populated in this table. You just get the out-of-the-box OEE changeover, OEE production. Those are the process segments, but I don't have any operations definitions at this point. So guess what? Oh, I'm sorry. I skipped one area. We also need to bring in the personnel properties as well. So because I have people that I had to build in manually, I now want to put some or associate some properties with them as well. So I'm going to go ahead and we're going to drop those in. Come over to the handy dandy script editor, get a clean slate.
So again, you know, if the properties of a person, you know, for example, the training or the machines that they're allowed to operate on or some other thing changes and are updated in the model, in that instance, it can be propagated, you know, across all systems rather than you having to go back in and update, you know, update that in every single system. Or, you know, if the top speed of a machine was to change, or if some other properties inherit, you know, you don't have to do that in every. You don't have to change the instances of that property in every software that you have.
Yes, this is, and likely this is going to be managed in that same identity provider, or whenever you do that authentication. But this is when we get into your personnel properties or class properties and person properties of, it's around what equipment are they allowed, what are they done, what level are they. These are properties that are associated with it. You can see that I have Rosa. She doesn't have any information about her that's characterized here. I want a little more information about it. I need, because I'm going to do some planning with it. So now we're going to add in some of those properties, and looks like everything happened as expected. So we're going to look at James, and you can now see that he's capper qualified, case packer qualified. You know, he can do changeover and CIP. I have an employee ID about him. You can see all the information that is associated. I also have what type of language that James. So what are the languages that James speaks versus what are the languages that say Rosa speaks, and you can see all of that within Cepasoft has now been populated. So you can see all types of start dates. She speaks English and Spanish, her years of experience, etc. All those properties are now available to you, so that if you need to start from a resource planning perspective, and you know, can I do this? This is that capability. Rosa's working today. Do I have the ability to execute the chocolate cakes and the answer is yes. She can do that, or she can pack up that juice itself. So started off the master data models. We've made it abstracted. We've brought in some equipment. Sometimes you have to do it manually. Sometimes you can do it through script. We now see that we have the ability to add in all the personal properties. Now we're finally going to get down to all of this is the modeling of the process operation itself. Is not only have we gone through all the resources and properties, we're actually going to teach or going to be able to now go execute some production with a lot of parameters. And this is going to be the big, long populate the process itself. And you can see that this is a fairly extensive script that needed to be done or created to do this. So we'll come here. This is the one I think we're going to have to hold our breath, cross our fingers, all the things that are associated with it. And we're now going to execute
the magic
all of
of Hollywood can save us.
Yes. So we'll see what happens. And there you go. You've now populated the entire piece. So I'll just go ahead and reset this. And now you can see that I have all of my process segments for making the blue or my operations definitions. So let me hide those real fast. We're going to look at just the process segments themselves. So real fast, again, this is just the generic version of I need to do some, I need to operate my case pack. I need to run a CIP process. I need to do a filling and capping step. I have some lines set up and changeover, and then I have the palletize step. These are all going to be very generic in how they are built. And then, of course, I also have all of my specific operations themselves. So now if I'm going to make blue juice, I'm going to give it a particular work center. And now I've built in all the operation segments that are associated with doing that. Now, if you were to look at the how Sapasoft goes about making recommendations, you would probably create an operations definition for each of these. I just did something very simple to look like, if I'm going to pack blue juice, these are going to be the different implementations of those operation segments, but they're going to be very specific. I'm going to have blue juice. I'm going to have specific material with specific properties that are associated with that. But that's what it looks like. I've now taken my entire master data model that's that's managed at an enterprise level, and I now have a common definition for how we build things across the entire enterprise. And I've been able to do some of it manually, some of it I do through scripting, but anytime there's a change, guess what? I just do whatever I need to do to be compliant with that. And of course, there's version control, and there's a lot more that goes into it. But point being is that I haven't built these models in any one system. I'm able to abstract that away. And now anybody can make blue juice across the enterprise and have everything that they need to go ahead and affect it and make a quality product anywhere throughout the enterprise.
So, and I suppose, let's say, I don't know, maybe we're jumping ahead. Someone's got the modeling bug and goes, right, I want to make some models, and look, maybe they'll call us, maybe they'll try without, but. And obviously, this is going to be a it depends answer, but the process of creating that database, creating that model, you know, the process of understanding, well, what do I have to put into it? How do I know what my process segments are going to be? You know, can you talk us through that? How long it takes? You know, and I think what's important maybe to say, and is that even if you don't go through it and you make it, you know, and create that database and find out make your model and spend the time finding it, when you go into Sapasoft or whatever MES you're doing, you'll have to type in and populate, and you know, probably a lot of it manually, that data, and that's when you create your model. You just didn't know you were doing it, you know. But just talk about that modeling process of, you know, what it looks like.
You know, in the way that you know, again, if I have a guy to do this for you, actually there's two of us. It's you know, part of the approach is we come in and we'll do this and we'll help you through this modeling process itself. What does this look like? But it's coming up with a common model. What do we need this to look like? Because the other approach, and what has happened historically, is that rather than me building this abstract model, I've just gone in and done the same exercise, but I've done it in a tool. The problem with doing it in a particular tool is that now if I make any changes to one piece of software, I don't have a way to propagate it to other sites, but I'm also now beholden to that particular software provider and the capabilities of that software.
Yeah.
And sometimes you run into a lot of business processes that are the result of, well, there were just limitations with this software, so we just did it elsewhere, or it's just the result of this software did it, so now we had to go about it. So you've captured it beautifully in that lead up to the question of, at some point you're going to have to build this. But if I built it my way at the Danville site and you've done it differently at the Highland site, well, now all of a sudden we have this interoperability problem. And now you want to apply AI across two different models, because what I call in the properties that I've defined are very specific to that particular site. And that's what we're trying to get away from. We have to agree upon what it is that we're going to call things, not just from a resource perspective, but when we actually execute, I want to have the same thing of I'm doing blank, and we agree upon what's included with that.
And I think, if we look back maybe 10 years at MES, the monolithic, large scale MOM platform where you had one tool doing all of this functionality, well, you ended up with one model, or certainly less models. Today, any plant that's digitally transforming is looking at more smaller, flexible tools for specific functionality. And the old paradigm has broken. And the idea that your tool can be where your model lives no longer holds. And I think not everybody has realized that they were creating a model in a tool that was allowing, and that all of the functionality was able to use that because all of the functionality was in one tool.
Sure. And I'm going to take that one step further. It's not just I'm going to create an abstract model. I want to create a model based upon a standard. And there are some really great products out there. I mean, we are very deliberate around standards-based manufacturing operations management built on a modern technology stack. If I'm still building bespoke models on a modern tech stack, I really haven't solved my problem. There was that related to that article of you're just doing dumber things faster with more energy. It's like that coffee article that I wrote. That's what's happening. So building that model that is going to be aligned across the entire enterprise, ideally standards-based, that not only are we going to agree on how we model stuff, but where there's going to be a universal way of here's how we've done this, and it becomes abstracted. So there's a lot of nuance to what we've done, but there's a reason why we got to do it that way.
Yeah, and I mean on the standards, I think, if you and I don't follow the standards and we make a model, we'll have, 40, 50 years of plant experience behind us. Standards have a lot more input from a lot more people, from a lot more plants. Even experienced people have worked in 20 plants, often which are the same. You might have worked in 6 dairies, which are essentially the same. So the other thing I like about standards is that you're taking that experience from a much wider pool. And it's made to be general, which then some people don't like because it's now general. But I mean, we can have the standards discussion another day.
Standards video, and we can spend some more time on it. But if you do this approach, now let's say you are a large enterprise where you make a lot of different products. And so the example I use is whether you make pantyhose or garden hose, I can apply that same standard I've abstracted away because I still have my same resources. I have my same process segments, operations, definitions, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now, if I need to do any kind of comparison of KPIs, which is KPIs in rule of thumb, what was my plan versus what was my actual, I have a way to see all that data. So anyway, this is what we're here to talk about, is when we do process modeling, it's not just your resource models or equipment models that you can have master data management around. You can do that around your process itself.
Great.
There's true value in doing it.
Absolutely. We'll leave it there. We'd love to invite questions from the audience.
There's a lot to digest here.
Yeah. People can comment in the questions and like and subscribe.
Yeah, do all the things they're supposed to do. All right, awesome. Have a great night, Mark. We'll talk later.
You too, David.
Yep.
Enjoy.